So we are going to carry on with 2 Kings tonight. We'll probably stay in 2 Kings and circle back around to Chronicles after we get through with Elisha. There'll be some things. We'll cover some events twice. But that's okay. They're not covered the same way. It's kind of like watching different news outlets. You get the same facts, but it's different news. So we'll look at that. But we stopped last week with Elijah, and probably the most famous thing, two things about Elijah that were famous, especially when you were a little kid, was the fire coming down from heaven and consuming the altar. And then when he rides up into heaven on a chariot of fire, which really isn't what the Bible says happened, but that's the drawings that we had from Bible school when we were little. So everybody remembers the color picture of Elijah's coat falling off the chariot while he's riding up into the sky. So it was actually on a whirlwind that he was on, and the chariot just showed up to make an announcement, I think. But anyway, we'll look at this together. And then we'll move right into chapter 3 as well, because there's a lot of parallel with stories that we've already looked at. And we'll begin to kind of get into the mind of the writer and find out what is he wanting us to give special attention to. And that's what we really want to pay attention. So it says, just before the Lord took Elijah up to heaven in a windstorm, Elijah and Elisha were traveling from Gilgal. Elijah told Elisha, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As certainly as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. Some members of the prophetic guild in Bethel came out to Elisha and said, "Do you not know that today the Lord is going to take your master from you?" He answered, "Yes, I know. Be quiet." Okay, so let's look at this a little bit. Excuse me. There's a travel progression that we will follow as we get across the Jordan. And then that same travel, or it could be looked at as a digression, Elisha travels pretty much the same route back. Now along the way we find these priests. And there's no explanation, but they know what's about to happen. So some commentators will say, well, Elijah's made this route and we don't have record of it, and he's let them know that on this day, I'm going to be caught up into heaven. And then other commentators will say that this is God preparing the people of Israel, not only for Elijah's departure and for Elisha's kind of coronation as the chief prophet in the land, but also that these prophets are being prepared for what is about to happen historically with these other nations that are about to come in and wreak havoc. Well, hello. How are you?
Pretty good.
Good. So it says, "As certain as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So Elisha, he's told to stay, and he says, "I will not leave you." The prophetic guild says, "Don't you know that today's the day that your master is going to be taken from you?" And he says, "I know, be quiet." And maybe there's a hint in Elijah that he knows that today's a big day for him too. He's already been chosen earlier when he slaughtered his oxen and started to follow Elijah. So Elijah said to him, "Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But he replies, "As certainly as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. Some members of the prophetic guild in Jericho approached Elisha and said, do you know that today the Lord is going to take your master from you? And he answered, yes, I know. Be quiet. All right. So this is the second time, almost verbatim, the words are used. The word in Hebrew, they are used verbatim. So then again, Elijah said to him, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jordan. This is the third time. But he replied, as certainly as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you. So they traveled together. The 50 members of the prophetic guild went and stood opposite them in a distance, while Elijah and Elisha stood by the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, folded it up, and hit the water with it. The water divided, and the two of them crossed over dry land. Okay. So 3 times Elijah says, wait here. And 3 times Elisha says, as sure as the Lord lives and you live, I'm coming with you. So what's the significance? What's the significance of the 3 times? We've gone through sets of 3 now since we started our study last year. We've gone through several of those, and they've always managed to do what for us? For God. Okay, so for Elijah to say, you stay, and for Elisha to say, no, I'm not staying, I'm going.
Was he being disobedient?
Was he being disobedient, or was he being
Caring.
overtly faithful?
Yeah.
Like, I am not going to leave you. I know that I have been chosen. You've already chosen me. There is nothing under heaven and nothing under earth. Meaning that's what it means by the Lord lives and by you live. Okay? So there's the Lord and there's God's man. There's God and there's God's man. God and Elijah. And Elisha says, I am not leaving God's man. I want to be near to God's man. I want to know what's coming next in this. And so 3 times, it's almost like a test. Elijah's testing him. Okay? Because by the time that this is all occurring, these towns aren't real, they're not the greatest of towns anymore. Bethel's lost its luster. Gilgal's lost its luster. And of course, Jericho was cursed. Okay? Which becomes very significant in chapter 3. We have to remember the curse that Joshua put on Jericho. You remember Ahab had a servant that was going to rebuild Jericho, and his 2 sons died, and that was attributed to the curse that Joshua had put on the city of Jericho. So now they've gone through Gilgal, Bethel, Jericho, and now they're at the Jordan. And much like Joshua, when Joshua was moving into the land of Canaan, now we see that Elijah is leading Elisha out of the land of Canaan, out of the promised land. Okay? And so there's a reset that is kind of going on here. There's a new thing that God is wanting to place Elisha square in the middle of, so that we'll see in a moment he crosses back over the Jordan and claims his own sense of power and destiny as a prophet. But he does some pretty significant things to cement this movement from one geography to the other, so that it really takes on the symbolic meaning that the writer wants it to take on. So I want us to not miss that. So they get there. He takes his cloak. It's folded up or rolled up, and he hit the water with it, very Moses-like when he's parting the Red Sea. The water divided, and the 2 of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed over, Elijah said to Elisha, "What can I do for you? Or what business do you have with me now, before I am taken away from you?" And Elisha answered, "May I receive a double portion of the prophetic spirit that energizes you." And Elijah replied, "That's a difficult request. If you see me taken from you, may it be so, but if you don't, it will not happen." So, interesting test here. If you want double what I am, what does Elisha have to do?
He has to stay with him until he's taken.
And pay attention.
Yeah.
You got to watch. This idea of, if you see me taken from you, it means that Elisha is sold into this deal, and he's focused. And so Elijah is really saying to him, if you are as focused as I have been focused, okay, or even more so, then this can happen to you, but it's not his to grant. Okay? It's not anything that he can do, it's the thing that God does. As they were walking along and talking, I wonder what that conversation was. Suddenly a fiery chariot pulled by fiery horses appeared. They, meaning the horses in the chariot, went between Elijah and Elisha, and Elijah went up to heaven in a windstorm or a whirlwind. So like I said earlier, the Bible school and children's picture that we saw growing up was Elijah in the chariot, which is not true. They just show up. It's like they are there to lead the way, or for whatever reason, but they're there and they come between them, almost as if to keep Elisha from being caught up in the same thing that Elijah was caught up in. And he went into heaven in the windstorm. While Elisha was watching, he was crying out, "My father, my father, the chariot and horsemen of Israel." So he sees this as a battle regimen that has come through, okay? And he's calling to him as his father in the same way that Joshua and Moses' relationship at the end has the same kind of feel, but never uses the name or the word father and that. But Elisha, because he has been chosen, and you remember earlier, the way that he was chosen was, what did Elijah do? He put his cloak over the shoulders of Elisha. So in royalty, and even in Jewish families, the child that was going to become the heir and responsible for what would happen in the home received the father's cloak and his ring. Okay, he had a signet ring. If he had any money at all, he had a ring that would make a seal. So this is the same thing. He's already received the cloak around his shoulders, and now he's going to receive the power that it possesses, okay, because God is allowing it. He grabbed his clothes and he tore them in two. So he's tore up about this. He didn't want to see him go, but now his father's gone, the one that he considers his father. So he goes into a state of mourning. And then he picked up Elijah's cloak, which had fallen off him, and went back and stood on the shore of the Jordan. Now, we always, in the Sunday school picture, the way that the King James understood that was the cloak had fallen off of Elijah. But what had really happened, we know now because we have the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's wonderful. The cloak had actually fallen off of Elisha as he was doing this, renting of his clothes. And so he picks up the garment again, hit the water with it, and said, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" When he hit the water, it divided, and Elisha crossed over. So the water had closed back, and Elisha states the foundation of everything that he's going to do. Okay, where is the God of Elijah? Meaning that I don't have any trust in this cloak. It's not a magic cloak. Okay, I'm calling on the God of Israel and the God of Elijah. When the members of the prophetic guild in Jericho, who were standing at a distance, now this is the second time it said that they were standing at a distance. What's going on? Okay, So the whole thing is to allow us to understand that those who were prophets, who had been brought up as prophets, who were prophesying in the name of the Lord, understood the unique place that Elisha held. And so everything that he's involved in this coronation of his person as a prophet, is to be treated much like it was when God was speaking to Moses on the mountain and they were all told to keep a distance. Okay, so it just again reminds us of the special, unique relationship that God chooses to have with some of those that he is called to do quite miraculous and quite often very difficult things to do. And this prophetic guild is recognizing the same thing. It doesn't make them, it does make them less in comparison to Elisha, but it doesn't make them any less as prophets in the country. The whole scene is to allow us to understand, or the reader to understand, the uniqueness and the power that is being placed upon Elisha. So they were standing at a distance, saw him do this. They said, "The spirit that energized Elisha rest upon Elisha." So the parting of the water is a kind of proof that, okay, the same spirit that was with Elijah is now with Elisha. Okay, kind of like his calling card. They went to meet him and bowed down on the ground before him. They said to him, "Look, there are 50 capable men men with your servants. Let them go and look for your master, for the wind sent him from the Lord. The wind sent from the Lord may have carried him away and dropped him on one of the hills or in one of the valleys." Okay, so if you read earlier, I would say how Elijah would just appear. He just, out of nowhere, there would be Elijah. At the beginning, he just shows up, and then at the strangest times, there was Elijah. And so they had the same kind of feeling about him, because God may have just moved him somewhere else, like he tends to do with him. So let's go look. And so they go look. But they were so insistent that Elisha became embarrassed and sent them out. So he said, "Send them out." They sent the 50 men out, and they looked for 3 days, but could not find Elijah. So they came back. When they came back, Elisha was staying in Jericho. And he said to him, "Didn't I tell you, don't go?" Like, I tried to tell you, this is a big waste of time. Okay, something interesting here, because earlier the prophets had said, "Don't you know this is the day?" Okay? The day that the Lord is going to take your master. All right? But then after it's all over, they start saying, "Well, maybe this isn't the day."
Yeah.
Okay? Let's go look, because maybe this is just too much to kind of get our minds around. This can't really have happened. All right? But Elisha knew. He knew. So now we do have a definitive understanding of Elisha. He's like one of the insiders of Jesus' disciples. He knows stuff everybody else doesn't know. And even though the prophets may have believed that was the day, ultimately they didn't have the faith to believe that it was that day. And so now Elisha is set apart wholly and completely. There's nothing that anybody can say it's not the real deal, 100%. So, next. Any comments about that or questions? The other thing that pops back up here from a previous story was that there's 50 of these prophets.
Yeah, there were 50 men. The captain and his 50 men.
Yeah. 3 times 50 men went out to get Elijah, and twice he killed them all, and the third time he received the proper respect that he was to have, and he didn't kill them. So here we have 50, and it only takes 50 to settle the matter. Okay, the number 50 rarely has any weight at all in Hebrew numerology. So don't get running and trying to look for the number 50. But it does say that it took 3 groups of 50 to try to deal with Elijah, and it takes one group of 50 to realize that Elijah's been taken up with the Lord. Then the men of the city, remember Jericho, the cursed city, said to Elisha, won't be the last time I do that. Look, the city has a good location, as our master can see. It was in a fantastic military location, trade location. But the water is bad, and the land doesn't produce crops. So they have no water that's good, and as a result, they can't provide food for themselves. So Elisha said, "Get me a new jar and put some salt in it." So they got it. He went out to the spring and threw the salt in. Then he said, "This is what the Lord has said. I have purified this water. It will no longer cause death or fail to produce crops. The water has been pure to this very day, just as Elisha prophesied." Okay. Now, salt's a funny thing to dump into a spring to make it pure. And having to have a new unused jar may seem to be out of sorts too. But when you look back to Leviticus and Numbers, I think there's a passage in Deuteronomy too, there's some instruction about how to offer grain sacrifices. And God instructed his people to offer salt with their grain sacrifice, and that it was to be kept in a jar that had never been used before. So, and he says, this is a covenant of salt before the Lord. Okay? So why would God choose salt way back when he's given instructions in the desert as to how to keep a covenant of salt?
It's precious.
It's precious.
Especially in the desert, because you get salt primarily from the sea. So.
Yeah. Takes a little bit to get salt. Mm-hmm. All right. So it's precious. It was an astringent and a cleanser. So it was thought to be a cleansing agent of sorts. And we still do it today. You get a sore throat, what does your doctor tell you? Gargle with salt water. Because it has an ability to straighten some things out there. I don't know how it works.
I put salt in our fish tanks too to help keep them from getting disease.
Okay. So yeah, same kind of purpose there. And it is in this spring of water that evidently at one time was a good spring of water, but Joshua comes along and announces a curse, and God honors the curse. So whenever you see a spring, especially in the Old Testament, and boy, Sunday nights we're going to be getting into this a lot, but water that God allows to spring up after he has capped the chaotic waters is life-giving water. And so this well or the spring was initially meant to be life-giving, but because of the way that they had approached and met the children of Israel as they came in, Joshua declares this curse, and now the water's no good. So what Elisha has ultimately done is he has reversed the curse that God allowed Joshua to put on the spring, and he has done it by means of a covenant, by using salt. Okay, makes sense? So everything that now Elijah, he's come from across the Jordan. Now he's moved in the same direction that the children of Israel did. Okay? And as Joshua moved across the river Jordan and met Jericho, he defeated it and cursed it. Now Elisha's moving in, and he's not defeating Jericho, and he's not cursing. What?
I just have a question about the spring. So is this spring watering like the crops too?
Yes.
Doesn't salt kill crops?
Well, That's the interesting part of this, right? You put salt water in your fresh fish tank?
Well, I put a little bit of salt.
Yeah.
That's good for it, but I don't put them in our plant tank because plants don't like salt. That's how you go when you conquer land and you want to destroy their crops. You put salt in the fields. And
Yeah.
they can't grow.
So another reason why we know that this is a godly covenant that's being made is this isn't just salt in water. This is a covenant of salt that he's been led to make with Jericho. So now it's like, okay, all these years, Jericho, you're back on the map. Okay, because Elijah has shown up. And he is exercising the will of God in a way that is doing what? This becomes important. This is like the initial foreshadowing of some very big things that happen. Okay, he's restoring.
Supernatural.
Yeah, so we're into this thing now where he's letting people see that I'm a God that restores, and you don't know it yet or not, but you're going to need restoring. And so he's showing this in a very microcosmic way. That the reader that is reading this entire volume we call the Old Testament, they're making all these connections. Bam, 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 bam. It's all making sense to them. Okay, we tend to read verse by verse or something like that because we're looking for a how-to manual on how to live. And they're looking for a revelation of God in all of this, and sometimes we miss it because we're trying to break it down and look for what it means to us, and God saying it means me to you. Just read it and pay attention. So anyway, that's what's happening there. So he went up from there to Bethel, the house of the Lord, is what that means, or the house of God. As he was traveling up the road, some young boys, and this could be boys from the age of 8 to 30. The word that the Hebrew uses here is very broad. It's not very specific. But they came out of the city, out of Bethel, and made fun of him. Okay? So what happened when Elijah did not get the respect of the king that wanted him to come? They said, you're going to do this or else, kind of thing. And Elijah said, okay, I'll kill all your men. All right? So they said, go up, Baldy. Go up, Baldy. Oh man, that's fighting words, right? When he turned around and saw them, he called God's judgment down on them. 2 female bears came out of the woods and ripped 42 of the boys into pieces.
That's horrible.
From there, he traveled to Mount Carmel and then back to Samaria. Remember, Carmel is where he defeated the Baal gods, and then now he's back at the capital city, Samaria. So yeah, we don't want to just run past the idea of these 42 boys getting mauled by bears. This is not the first time that a bear has been used to set things right. Remember the prophet that he had gone and...
The lion?
Yeah, no, it was a bear, wasn't it? It was a lion. There's another bear. Where's the bear? This is the second time. But anyway, here's 2 of them, and they come out and they maul. It doesn't say that he killed them. You can be mauled by a bear and survive, but the idea is that as a group they were punished, and 42 of them paid the price. But we don't know how many there are. Now, some commentators will say, well, there was 50 because we've already had 50, twice. And so only 42 of the 50 were mauled. The other 8, they were spared for however reason or for whatever way. But the idea here, again, is God's prophet is not receiving the respect that God intends for his prophet to receive, and somebody's going to pay. So when we move, these are the initial prophets. Samuel's called a prophet, but then after the kingdom divided, Elijah and Elisha, these are the 2. And so early on, the writer is hoping to establish in the mind of the reader, God has a deep respect for the men that he's chosen, and he expects others to respect those men. And so when you don't, there's a price to pay. All right, when we get into the later chapters of this, many of the kings choose not to listen to God's prophets. They're listening to all these other prophets. And of course, they pay the price. They ultimately are ignoring the prophetic word of God, and terrible things begin to happen, you know. So this is another little microcosmic foreshadowing or foretelling of what is to come that the reader is able to know, but the main actors that are dealing in this, they don't know. All right. Any comments, questions about that?
I don't think it was a bear.
I may have been, I don't know why I thought it was a bear.
I just looked it up and I didn't see anything about bears.
Yeah. I'd have to look in my concordance.
References to fighting like a bear.
Yeah. My mistake. I had a big mistake. I mistaked a lion for a bear.
I mean,
Yeah.
lion, tiger, bear.
Oh my.
Minutes.
All right.
Big help.
In the 18th year of Jehoshaphat's reign over Judah. Remember, Jehoshaphat's the southern king. Ahab's son Jehoram became king over Israel and Samaria.
What'd you do? Sorry,
Jehoram.
okay, I got
You got it?
it. No,
And I think Jehoram in the Chronicles is Joram. The names get all messed up here because they add a vowel,
In here it says
and it's the
Joram.
same guy.
In here it says Joram.
Yeah. Yeah, so it gets confusing. So this Jehoram did evil in the sight of the Lord, but did not do the same degree as his father and mother. So he wasn't as bad as Ahab and Jezebel. Of course, who is? Nobody is, we find out. He did remove the sacred pillar of Baal that his father had made. So in Samaria, there's some archaeological renderings of this that makes this big ziggurat to Baal. It appears to be 500-600 feet tall. So it's a gargantuan thing. Yeah, I don't know how they determine that, but some people, that's all they do is sit around and look at rocks and determine stuff like that. But it's but he tore it down. Yet he persisted in the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who encouraged Israel to sin. He did not turn from them. So this is what's happening. He tore down the big ziggurat, but he's still encouraging the people to worship Baal. Okay, that was an idols, because Jeroboam, there wasn't Baal. He just made 2 golden calves, and he told the people to worship that was their true God that brought them out of their wanderings and out of Egypt. So he's encouraging them in idol worship or non-Yahweh worship. Now, King Mesha of Moab, you've heard that name before, was a sheep breeder. So here's a new story about Mesha, who's already been to battle once, and it didn't turn out too well for him. Okay, he would send a tribute. In fact, Mesha was part of the thing where they attacked each other. Remember that? And they killed each other, and then the Israelites went out there to see what had happened, and everybody was dead, so they took the plunder. Yeah. Now, King Mesha of Moab was a sheep breeder. He would send a tribute to the king of Israel, 100,000 male lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. Man, that is a lot. But when Ahab died, the king Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. So Ahab died, and he didn't have any respect for his son. Okay, that comes on the scene here. At the time, King Jehoram left Samaria and assembled all Israel for war. So he is marching out toward Moab, and he's assembling for war. He sent this message to King Jehoshaphat of Judah. The king of Moab has rebelled against me. Will you fight with me against Moab? So Jehoshaphat's gone this thing with Moab too. And he said, yeah, because we beat them last time. So I think I'll throw my hat into this deal. All right. Let's see. So he said. Then he asked, which invade? I'm sorry. He said, will you fight with me against Moab? He says, yes, I will join you in the campaign. My army and horses are at your disposal. He then asked, which invasion route are we going to take? Jehoram answered, by the road through the wilderness of Edom. Okay, so remember, Edom during this period of time has no king, and they make a point of telling us that early. And so the people of Edom have kind of been depending upon Judah to be their protector. So there's kind of a subservient role here that Edom plays toward Judah. And we kind of see some of this come into play. If you're marching into a battle, you go through friendly territory as far as you can until you get there, and that's what Edom allowed them to do. So the kings of Israel, Judah, and Edom set out together. The word, let's see, there's a note for king. Okay. Nothing special there. They wandered around on the road for 7 days and finally ran out of water. It makes it sound like they don't know what they're doing. Okay, they wandered around on the road for 7 days and finally ran out of water for the men and animals they had with them. The king of Israel said, "Oh no, certainly the Lord has summoned these 3 kings so that he can hand them over to the king of Moab." So, all right, let's get back to it. Water is life. It was a symbol of God's provision. All right, and now they're out of water. Okay, so what's the logical conclusion? Well, God's upset because he's not allowing us to have any life-giving water. And so it must mean that he's led us out here to be slaughtered by the Moabites. You see how they marched through that? Instead of just, he just brought us out here to die. There's a reason why they're thinking that, and that's because the water's been cut off. And when the water's cut off, that's God's business. That's what God does. All right? So that's what's going on in their minds here. Jehoshaphat asked, "Is there no prophet of the Lord here that we might seek the Lord's direction?" Does that sound familiar? Micaiah, remember they started looking for him. Ahab, his old nemesis, he said, "Oh no, not that guy. He never says anything good about me." And sure enough, he didn't. He said, "You're going to die," and he dies the craziest way. I mean, a stray arrow hits a stray part of his armor. And okay, so one of the servants of the king of Israel answered, "Elisha, son of Shaphat, is here. He used to be Elijah's servant." So Jehoshaphat said, "Yes, he receives the Lord's messages." So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Edom, we don't ever hear his name, went down to visit him. So evidently he's close by. Elisha said to the king of Israel, "Why are you here? Go to your father's prophets or your mother's prophets." And the king of Israel replied to him, "No, for the Lord is the one who summoned these 3 kings so that he could hand them over to Moab." All right, so you get the thing that's going on here. Elisha says, "Why don't you go to your pagan gods and ask them what you're supposed to do?" And he's saying, "Oh no, it's your God that's brought us out here to die. We want to know what his plans are." Okay, so they have no idea about God's providence other than we know that he's not given us any water and he's led us into the hands of this Moabite king, who by this time in history is pretty powerful. They're kind of the precursor to the Syrians that ultimately give way to the Assyrians, and then later they give way to the Babylonians. And so you just kind of see these huge empires just fall and fall and fall until the Greeks show up. So he says, Elijah says, "As certainly as the Lord of heaven's armies lives, whom I serve, if I did not respect King Jehoshaphat of Judah, I would not pay attention to you or acknowledge you." So he is saying to Jehoram, if you hadn't have made this allegiance with Jehoshaphat, you'd have to go it on your own. Okay? But he says, because Jehoshaphat's here, I'm gonna see what God has to say about all this. Okay? So they're still within the mind of Elisha, and there is still in the providence of God a nation that is unto God himself that he's willing to honor. And we saw earlier that he was willing to do this with the northern kingdom so that they would know that he was the Lord God. Okay? Those words are mysteriously or just not a part of what we hear in this. So we're beginning to see that there's a movement away, and we're hearing the echo of Asa's, the prophet to Asa saying, if you seek the Lord, he will allow himself to be found by you, but if you reject the Lord, he will reject you. So now we're beginning to, the language is kind of leading us into that reality as we move forward in these narratives. He says, but now get me a musician. I think that. Turn on the radio. So I can, everybody wonders why a musician at this point. It's probably pretty chaotic. Everybody thinks they're out here to die. Everybody's talking at once. And he says, man, I just need some music I got to get in my groove. I got to get in my prophetic groove. You like that?
I like it.
I think that's what's going on here. When the musician played, the Lord energized him. So the music played, and things kind of leveled out, and Elijah was able to experience the Lord. So that's a remarkable statement that's put right there. And he said, this is what the Lord said, make many cisterns in this valley. For this is what the Lord has said, you will not feel any wind or see any rain, but this valley will be full of water, and you and your cattle and animals will drink. This is an easy task for the Lord. He will also hand Moab over to you. You will defeat every fortified city and every important city. You must chop down every productive tree, stop up all the springs, and cover all the cultivated lands with stones. So what are they to do when they get to Moab? Make it a wasteland. That's what they're instructed to do. So the thing is here, I'm going to provide you life, but you're gonna sentence them death. Okay? Contrasting works here. All right? God never gives a reason why he's doing this other than this is what I'm going to do. So, sure enough, I like how they translate that here. Sure enough, the next morning, at the time of the morning sacrifice, water came flowing down from Edom and filled the land. All right, so water just comes flowing down out of the hills of Edom through this wadi, which was not an unusual thing. That's what happened. In the rainy season, it would rain, and water would come down out of the hills of Edom, fill the wadi, and there would be this river that would be there for a while. And what really happened was that wells were revitalized by the rainwater. It would seep in the ground, and okay. But God's already told them there's not going to be any rain. This is going to happen without the rain. So this is indeed this is what I'm doing, and it's no big deal for me to do. I do this all day, every day, if you want me to, kind of thing. Okay, so that's what's happening. Now all Moab had heard that the kings were attacking. So they've heard somehow that these kings are attacking, but all that's happened right now is that it's time for the morning sacrifice, and this water has flowed down from Eden and filled up these cisterns that they dug in the ground. So everyone old enough to fight was mustered and placed at the border of Moab. When they got up early the next morning, the sun was shining on the water. To the Moabites, who were some distance away, the water looked red like blood. The Moabites said, "It's blood. The kings must have fought one another."
Oh.
Remember that story? They've experienced this. Hey, the same thing that happened to us must have happened to them. Okay, so why would these cisterns, when they're all from a distance, look like it's just one big pool there? Why would they think it looked red? Well, the reason why is because all of the geology in that wadi is red. All the rocks are red. Like, have you ever been to Red Rocks in Colorado? I probably haven't been to Red Rocks outside of Denver. But man, Red Rocks, when you drive into it, there's these big flat iron rocks sticking up out of the ground, and they're as red can be. And so it's the same kind of rocks in this area. It's really red. And so they see the reflection in this water, these red rocks, and they're thinking, oh man, they've slaughtered one another. What idiots. I mean, really, you think that happens twice? Actually, it did happen twice. All right. The Moabites said it's blood. They fought out one another. The soldiers have struck one another down. Now Moab seized the plunder. When they approached the Israelite camp, the Israelites rose up and struck down the Moabites, who then ran from them. The Israelites thoroughly defeated Moab. They tore down the cities, and each man threw a stone into every cultivated field until they were covered. They stopped up every spring and chopped down every productive tree. And here's the big butt of everything. Only Kir Hareseth was left intact. Every time it seems God says to do something, they just can't do it. Same thing happened with Samuel. Same thing happened with David. Same thing has happened multiple times throughout this divided kingdom. They just can't seem to do what God said, and that is to get rid of what? Everything. When the king of Moab realized he was losing the battle, he and 700 swordsmen tried to break through and attack the king of Edom, but they failed. So we don't know what they're trying to break through. We don't really know that this city, other than what is the capital city of Moab, and it probably was the city Moab. There was just like Samaria becomes the name of the northern kingdom because the capital is in Samaria. But it never really makes that clear in the passage. So he took his firstborn son, who was to succeed him as king, and offered him up as a burnt sacrifice on the wall. There was an outburst of divine anger against Israel. So they broke off the attack and returned to their homeland. Now, this is one of the most debated sentences in all the Bible. Why did God's anger burst out against the Israelites if it's a Moabite king that sacrificed his son? And there's no good answer. There's no good literary answer. There's no good vocabulary answer. There's no good answer. You get, when you got no good answer, you get all kind of answers. Because a lot of the commentators will say, well, the idea that it was against Israel was added for some reason. It really would have been against the Moabites. But up until this point, God has not done anything against the Moabites other than what he's instructed Israel to do. A lot of them believe that this would not have been a problem if they had taken care of the city that was left. So that this king of Moab does this very rash thing, and so God kind of holds the Israelites responsible for the king, offering his own son as a burnt sacrifice. It could be that God just abhors this kind of thing, and doesn't want anybody to ever imagine that this was okay. And so the Moabite king had lost everything, including his heir. And now God is making sure that the Israelites understand that this is the kind of thing that is to never, ever happen. It will always bring my anger, regardless if you're responsible for it or not. If you're in the vicinity of this, then my anger is going to burn. That's the answer that I like the best. Is that God is so abhorred by human sacrifice that his anger flows no matter who's in the neighborhood. Everybody's going to get it. Of course, later, child sacrifice does creep into the life of the northern kingdom. And almost immediately after that, they're lost to history. They're taken into exile, and you know very little about the northern tribes after that. So that's kind of where I go with that. That God is he's just turned inside out over a father sacrificing his son. Only what happens? Some 800 years later, he sacrifices his son. So it's not the act as it is the purpose behind it. And it's not just the purpose behind it, but who is performing that act. Okay, so God reserves for himself the purpose of the death of a child.
Kind of makes me think of Egypt too. After Pharaoh's son was killed, finally the Israelites like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's like, okay, this is enough.
Yeah, enough of that. Go on. So it is enough, and of course we're privy to the whole story. There is a sacrifice made on behalf of every human being to cleanse us of our sin, and that's in Jesus, and that's God's action and God's purpose. And there's no way that the taking of a life for any other reason adds up as anything good for God, other than when he says that this is what I demand, this is what I require. So again, we're reminded that it's God who has lordship over life. And whenever we step into that arena, it's never been good. You can't find anywhere in history where we've stepped into the arena of taking human life and it's been celebrated as a good thing, and it's turned out good for those that have done it. Not in the Roman arena, not in war, not in the abortion clinics. Nowhere does it turn out good. There's no good that comes of it. And in this situation, it was hoped to be a pragmatic thing to save himself, right? He had tried to escape, but he couldn't, so his next solution is, I'll just kill my son. Maybe that'll work for me. Yeah. And so we do that a lot.
Was that common?
Well, yes, sadly. And when you read the same time period for the Babylonians and the Phoenicians, the Persians later, they're not, but they got over it quick. If I understand the timeline right, they, at the very beginning of their rise to power, it was a part of what they did, but then it disappears. And so either they learned something or just decided that wasn't going to be a part of their life. I still haven't learned the discipline of reading all that old stuff. It drives me crazy. They need to have an easy to read version. It's all written in this old, most of it's in French, and that's been translated into English, and they did it all back in the 1810, 1815, and I just can't make heads or tail of it.
Do you think he thought maybe they were going to kill him and his son? And so...
Well, it says, I think, doesn't it say that he offered him up as a burnt sacrifice?
Yeah, I mean,
so
like he's watching his entire kingdom come to nothing, and he's probably thinking the next thing is going to be like me
Well, and the other thing about it is it doesn't mention a god that he sacrificed to. So it's kind of like this is a sacrifice to somehow or another save my neck type of thing. If it was a god that was mentioned,
You know, if he was the kind of king who, sorry, I should probably let you finish, but the thought just popped in my head. If he was the kind of king who would sacrifice his son to save his own neck and was that evil, then yeah, God, you should. Like, I can see why God would tell them to destroy his kingdom. If you have a king that's evil and the people are following him, then like, bye.
And we look at the history of it. The Moabites are really removed so the Syrians can move in, and that's the first domino that begins to fall for. So it could be that God's looking at the whole thing. He says, "I know I'm sending my people into exile. The Moabites are never going to have the strength to do it, but the Syrians will. I'm getting the Moabites out of the way so I can get this thing rolling, because this has got to happen." And he'd already said it was going to happen. And so there's a lot of ways to look at it historically, theologically, and otherwise. And we really need to look at all of them when we look at it. But it is a hotly debated verse, just simply because of how it's written. And so I think we've touched on all of that. Any comments or anything about any of that? Y'all still liking this? We're almost done. We get through it well. Kings is it takes a while to get through all this. There's a lot. There's a lot of narrative in that's left in the Kings. So we will be looking at some more of that. Next week, I won't be here. You won't be here either.
Well,
are you? Did you and Landry get all that straightened out?
I think I'm doing Monday and Tuesday.
Okay.
And